It's dark, it's quiet, and you want to go home. That's working the night shift on a good day. But as these allegedly true scary stories will show you, it can get much, much worse. Enjoy these night shift horror stories, and try your best not to call in sick afterward. If you have a scary story, send it over to us at darkstories.org. If you like what I do, like and share this video too. Now, let's begin. Disappearance at the Lake, from Marls666. Last Wednesday, I drove down to work at a factory near the lake, a 2-hour round trip from my home to work, which would be a 3 to 11:30 shift. I've been forced to travel from my home due to the current world circumstances. I got to work early so I could eat my lunch, then go down by the lake. It was a hot day, and the air felt strangely silent. A while later, some duck hunters pulled up. They were rough-looking men and were talking about their kill. Next, a man and his son pulled up with fishing gear. They unloaded their gear on the back of their tailgate. When I finished my lunch and pulled away in my car, I heard the man say towards me a certain word starting with N. I distinctly remember hearing it. I thought it odd and extremely racist, but I didn't let it bother me. The following day when I got to work, I noticed that the road to the lake was now blocked off by police cars with flashing lights. I thought that was odd too, but I continued about my business. It was only later when I read the news that I found out what had happened there at the lake that day. 2 teenage girls had gone missing. Their inner tubes were found a mile away. However, the girls were not found, and a search party was out looking for them. The weird part about the story was that a fisherman was quoted as having picked up the girls' phones, which were abandoned next to their clothes on the shore. My mind flashed back to the man and his son that I'd seen at the beach that evening. At that point, a week and a half later, the girls were still not found. I read in the news article that the waves on the lake were 10 feet high that day due to a freak storm, and the girls could have been drowned. Or they could have been kidnapped by people with sinister purposes. Either way, something bad happened there that night, all while I worked my late shift nearby. Night at the Theater, from HorrorFan71092. I'm the house manager at a fairly new and quite large performance venue with 3 large theaters. On nights where we had 3 events going all at once and all were sold out, we'd have about 1,700 patrons in the building. Oftentimes, 2 or even 3 shows would open doors for seating and then begin at the exact same time, making it difficult on my front of house usher staff to keep up with checking in tickets and seating our patrons. My ushers are responsible for cleaning a theater before and after a show. If more cleaning is necessary, then custodial will come to help. They also check tickets at the theater doors, escort guests to their seats, sit in-house during performances to ensure all patrons are following rules and are being safe, and monitor late seating after a show has begun. The ushers do a good job, though many are snarky college students. But generally, they all want to be there, because it's a thrilling place to work. My job is rather different. I'll arrive to work at about 45 minutes before the ushers. This gives me time to place ushers at their various posts, ticket checkers, in-house, seating, etc. I'll collect any new information from our production staff on details about how the show will go, and I'll create small handouts for the ushers with door and show times and any specific details for the shows on them that the ushers keep for the shift. Once the ushers arrive, I brief them on the show they're working on and send them to clean and prep the theaters. I work with production to determine when to open the house for seating. Once the audience is set, doors close, and I have time to do paperwork, or just hang out in my office behind the box office desk. Before intermission, if there is one, not all shows have an intermission, doors open for a typical 15-minute intermission where people mill about in the lobby. buying refreshments from the cafe and using the restrooms. During intermissions, I'm at the front desk waiting to take compliments, complaints, or questions from patrons. After doors close at the end of the intermission, box office staff close and leave for the night, and there's more leisure time until the end of the show, where the patrons leave, ushers clean, and then the ushers leave, and I'm alone in the front lobby. After that, I have to do what we call a front of house report that is sent to the production staff, and the director of the professional theater company housed in our venue, the directors of the building, box office manager, etc. I have to include everything that went wrong during a show, as well as show times and other details. It is at this point in the night where my story begins. It was a snowy night in December of 2019. The lobby of my performance venue has very large windows, and we're situated on a hill, so we can see the lights of the city dipping down before rising up to the mountains just a few miles away. From inside, we could easily see the snow coming down hard as guests arrived for the shows. It being the holiday season, our lobby was decorated with a large 2-story Christmas tree, garlands on railings, and twinkle lights everywhere. That night, we sold out 3 events. One was a theatrical performance of the Santaland Diaries. Another was the guest performance of the Moscow Ballet, doing their Great Russian Nutcracker. And the last was a Bach recital with a small orchestra. The night had already been stressful for me and my ushers, as the 2 Christmas shows opened the theater doors and began the shows at the exact same times, and the recital opened doors for seating just as the other 2 shows were closing doors and starting. This meant that along with the crowd of patrons going to the 2 shows, other patrons were arriving early for the recital and were getting lost in the mix in the lobby. During nights like this, a big problem for front of house staff is that many patrons don't read which theater they're supposed to go to on their tickets, so they wait in long lines for the wrong theater. Then they get mad and come and complain to me. This happened several times that night. After all 3 shows had started, there was a bit of peace for myself, the box office staff, and the ushers. We were able to sit down or maybe grab a soda or coffee from the cafe housed in the lobby. That was when one of my ushers first reported him. A strange man who looked like he could be homeless was seen sitting at the far end of the lobby in a quiet back corner. In this building, all types come and go. For all we knew, the guy could have been a friend of an actor or something, just waiting for the show to end. I decided to wait to approach him until after intermissions had finished. Both the Christmas shows went on intermissions at the same time. This meant I got twice the amount of complaints, comments, questions, or compliments. That night, there were a lot of those. In this job, you only remember a few select comments, compliments, and questions, but you remember almost every complaint you get. Tonight, it was mainly, "With this snow, is there any way to get a ride to our car, or can we pay you to go get it and bring it to the front doors?" Or, "It is just so hot inside the theater in our seats and nobody wants to trade seats. It looks like the theater is full, but I'm sure there must be some seats we can move to." Or, 15 minutes is not long enough for an intermission, especially if you want to drink or use the restroom. You need to hold the show until everyone can get what they need." Or there's the one that happens a lot since we don't allow photos, videos, or audio recordings inside the shows, which is, "The usher told me to stop taking photos, and that I needed to delete them. But it's my right as a free American to take photos whenever and wherever I want." Basically, intermissions are headaches. Following the conclusion of the 2 simultaneous intermissions, I went to do a quick check on the strange man at the back of the lobby. He was gone, and I figured he must have been a patron who had left the theater and couldn't re-enter until intermission. Following the intermission for the recital, where we actually got a few complaints along the lines of, "These Christmas decorations offend me," I walked around doing rounds of both the front of house spaces as well as backstage. We don't lock our backstage doors as there's a production crew, and sometimes actors, passing back and forth from the lobby to backstage. As I was passing behind the theater doing Santaland Diaries, I spotted the man I'd seen earlier entering the green room. For those who don't know, the green room in a theater is like a resting area, where performers can sit and rest before going on stage. Oftentimes, there are kitchens in green rooms. Our green room might remind someone of their grandparents' house. We used old prop furniture to decorate it. The couches looked like they're from the 1900s, and we had a long wooden table. Props from past shows line the walls and cabinets, and it has a real homey feeling to it. I followed this man into the green room, and as I entered, he was leaning over in the refrigerator pulling out someone's sack dinner that they'd left in there. I asked him who he was and why he was back here, and in a stuttered voice he said, "I'm just bringing my friend this." Then he pretended to put the bag back in the fridge. I could see the name on the bag and had seen who it belonged to carrying it in earlier in the evening. And in order to not cause any loud noise backstage with 3 shows going on, I said, "That's very nice of you, but I'm going to need to ask you to go back in the front lobby. Only staff and performers are allowed backstage, especially during shows." He then gave me a really sinister glare, saying, Fine. If you don't want me bringing my friend her food, then I won't." He grabbed the bag and marched out, then back to the front lobby. I would have told him to put the bag back, but he seemed the type to start a fight. I let it go and made a note to find the girl after the show whose dinner was now gone. Then I would buy her dinner at the end of the night. After going back to the front desk, I did not see the man anywhere, so I figured he had left. I went into my office to start my front of house report, because there was a lot to add that night. The shows all ended with more compliments and complaints, and after dismissing the ushers for the night, I was on my own. All the performers have a particular talent for dressing quickly and booking into their cars to leave, before the swarms of patrons cause a traffic jam at the one traffic light at the entrance of the parking lot. The only people in the building were myself and 2 or 3 members of the production crew, who were making sure that all the lights were off and everything was set to go home. When everyone leaves, I go out of my office and do my report at the front desk, where I can see everything in the lobby on the ground floor. After typing my bit in my report about the strange man, I had mostly put him out of my mind. I went to lock all the exterior doors in the front lobby. I am not responsible for the backstage doors. Having locked those, I start going through theaters, checking that they are empty and that the ushers did a decent job cleaning. I start with the smallest theater that seats about 400 people. This was the one the recital was in. Then I move on to the Santaland Diaries Theater, which is a large black box theater that seats 450. Then I move on to the largest one that seats around 900. All the lights were out in the large theater except the ghost light on stage. I usually just walk through because the ghost light is enough light, but I didn't like how I felt at that moment in that big 3-story theater. So I hit the switch in the control booth to turn on the house lights too. And that's when I spotted the man. He was slowly trying to climb over the wall and into the orchestra pit while crouching down, trying not to be noticed. I called out to him that the building was closed and he shouldn't be here. He turned around and it took a moment for him to recognize me before he pulled his leg back over the wall and began to sprint right at me. I jumped back into the control booth, locking the door with my master keys. He began pounding on the door, screaming profanities at me. Fortunately, that door was a strong fire door and wasn't going to give out anytime soon. But my worry was when he realized that outside the booth was a wall of sliding windows that didn't have locks on them, that allowed the people in the booth to talk to the people at the sound desk just in front of the booth. There was nothing I could do to block the windows from being opened or smashed, if it came to that. I started to dial 911 when the banging stopped and the man appeared at the glass windows. He started hitting those, not realizing the windows would just slide open and he could climb in easily. It was then that I remembered there was a ladder in the electrical closet in the booth that led up to the catwalks above the theater. I ran to the closet and locked the door behind myself, and I started to climb up the ladder. It was a long ladder in a narrow shaft. It felt like climbing up a very tall and cramped chimney. The ladder passes the upper 2 levels of audience seating without any access to them, and onto the catwalks, which are 4 stories above the ground level seating. These are not flimsy wooden catwalks that you might see in movies or old theaters. but solid, wide catwalks with 3 large aisles going across the top of the theater. At the back of the theater on the catwalk level is another booth. It is similar to the main control booth, except this is where the massive shotgun spotlights are that production crew have to manually move across the stage. I locked myself into this box and finally dialed 911. The cops were on their way and the dispatcher wanted me to stay on the line with him until the officers got there. I was watching down from the catwalks as the guy walked back from the booth, looking around the theater like a hawk. He seemed to have no idea I'd gone up, but was expecting me to pop out from some ground-level door. The police arrived in 7 minutes, and I had to give them the code to the keypad to get in, since now all the doors were locked, and only I and this creeper were in the building. Next came the problem. All the doors to the theater were locked, and there were no keypad locks on any of them. It would take too long for them to break down a door, and so the dispatcher asked if I could do something. Now the catwalks have 3 entrances. The horrible ladder I had just come up, a narrow staircase on house left that led down into the orchestra pit, with a locked door at the bottom of it, and a narrow staircase on house right that led down onto the stage. From there, if I was quick enough, I could run across the stage to the center at the back wall and open the massive stage door to let the police into the theater. The danger with this was that there are ramps on either side of the stage, leading out into the audience that would make it really easy for the creep to run up and chase me. This was the only option, though. I left the booth and went down the stairs as quietly as I could. When I got to the bottom before opening the door onto the stage, the dispatcher told me to put the phone in my pocket and not look back. Then I would yell "now" just as I was opening the door to run. I did so, and I ran as fast as I could across the stage. The creep must have been either on the stage already or on the ramp on house right, because he was extremely close behind me. I could hear his heavy breathing nearly on my neck behind me, and I knew that if I tripped I was so screwed. I made it to the big stage door, but just as I grabbed the handle, the creep rammed into the back of me and pushed me hard into the door. Thankfully for me, the door had to be pushed out, not pulled in, and so the cops were on him in an instant. They arrested him and he was charged with assault on an officer, assault on me, and trespassing. He's waiting to go to trial as I write this in May of 2020. His trial's been postponed because of all this outbreak mess. The cops did tell me that it turned out that he was homeless and had a record that included vehicle theft, burglary, assault, and battery. I walked away from this incident with only a black eye and 2 cracked ribs from hitting the door so hard. I think I came out better than he did. The police had to pile on him to get him in handcuffs, and his right arm got broken in the process. This is how a shift that should have ended for me at around 11:30 p.m. kept me at work until 2 in the morning. It was the scariest night of my life. To the creep that invaded my workspace, trespassed, chased, screamed at me, and hurt me, let's never meet again. Creepy Customer from MrFavorable. I'm 26 as of now, and this story happened in the summer of 2009. I was 14, growing up in a small town called Fife Lake. My mother would work at multiple jobs while I was growing up, to support my brother and I. One of the most common places I remember her working at were either gas stations or small party stores. She ended up working at this gas station in Fife Lake called Beacon and Bridge. Often my brother and I would go to her work during the summer to visit and sometimes even help her back in the coolers, helping stock things like soda for her. I remember this day in particular because after my mother's shift, we were supposed to go on this huge family camping trip, and today we were all going to go tubing down the CCC bridges with a lot of cousins, aunts, and uncles. I was pretty excited to see my family and couldn't wait for my mom to get out of work. She had about 2 hours left in her shift, so myself and my brother were waiting around the gas station. I remember this shorter, heavier-set lady had come in. I didn't think much of her because that day seemed busy, and I was helping my mother stock the cooler. When I came out, the lady was standing near the section where you can make coffee or get a fountain drink. She was right next to the area I was coming out of. When I came out of the back cooler area, she was staring at me and smiling. My young, naive self back then was very friendly, and I spoke with anyone, so I smiled and said hello. She seemed overjoyed that I acknowledged her presence, and started talking to me about the weather and how nice it was. I agreed with her, and I said I was waiting for my mom to get out of work so our family could go down the river. She kind of ignored that, then asked if I could hold her purse for her. I didn't think much of it, so I said, "Sure, I can hold it for you." Then she began to open her purse while I was holding it. Now I need to mention she was holding some things she wanted to buy. I can't really remember what it all was, but it seemed like miscellaneous stuff like a car charger and AA batteries. She was looking through her purse, and I looked at her. Then I began to notice her arms were very chalky white, like to the point if I touched her arm, powdery stuff would come off of it. I thought it was odd, but quickly forgot about it when the woman asked me, "Can you help me find my money in my purse?" I was very taken back at the question and began to feel uneasy at her request. I was raised to never go into my mom or dad's wallets or purses unless I was directly asked to. It's a type of respect, I suppose, for our personal belongings. I asked her, "Are you sure you need me to?" Then she got this wicked smile, showing her darkened yellow teeth and her eyes becoming wild with excitement. "I really would appreciate if you could help me find my money so I can buy these things I need." Uncomfortable with her request and how she was looking at me, I agreed and started to look around her purse that was full of all these things. There were cell phones, tape, lighters, toothpicks, all sorts of stuff. I was looking around through it for money. Then towards the bottom of the purse, there were thick wads of $100 bills rolled up and rubber banded together. I'm talking like 5 or 6 of these wads. If you've ever watched a movie that has dealers or mafias in it, you know what that probably looks like. I pulled out one of these rolls of cash and handed it to the lady. Her smile got even larger and she thanked me for handing her her cash. The whole situation had me on edge, though. For multiple reasons, I'm in the middle of the store and at any time she could shout that I'm going to rob her. The look she had been giving me the entire time creeped me out, and finally she asked me the question that absolutely floored me. She had asked with her wide, creepy smile, "I'm going to Chicago to see my friends. Would you like to come with me?" I tried to hide my fear and shakily laughed, saying, "I'm only 14. I can't go with you. My mother wouldn't let me even if I wanted to go." The lady had come back with, "You can go hide in my car and you can run away with me. I'll buy you whatever you want and you don't have to go to school." I was extremely uncomfortable at this point and I looked around for my mom. She was nowhere in sight, and there weren't many customers I could look to for help. I didn't really know how to get out of the situation I was in, so I told the woman, "I can't go with you, as cool and fun as it sounds. I have to go help my mom. Have a good trip." I walked towards the back of the store and slipped out the back door. I had the keys to my mom's van and I quickly went in and sat in the driver's seat, trying to calm down. I texted some of my friends trying to forget what happened, and I waited for my mom to finish her late shift. As I sat there waiting, dismissing what had happened, I noticed there were a few more cars around my mother's car than had been there before. I saw a lot of vehicles towards the front of the gas station getting gas and whatever else they needed. I was hoping that the lady was parked away from my mother's vehicle. But as luck would have it, I saw her making her way around the corner of the store, walking towards her vehicle that was literally parked right next to my mother's van. I was trying to lie the seat down I was sitting in so she wouldn't see me, but she did, and that creepy smile came back when she saw me. She walked by, getting into her car. She rolled down her windows and started calling for me. Young man, excuse me." She kept calling to me. Finally, I sat up and looked at her and asked, "What's up?" She then began to ask me, "You sure you don't want to go to Chicago? I've got all types of fun things and we could keep you more than occupied. You like drugs? Do you want to try any?" She sat there smiling excitedly. My stomach sank in disgust and I looked at the clock in the van, seeing my mom should be out at any moment. I told the woman again,
"No thank you, I'm not interested. I don't do that stuff, please leave me alone."
The creepy, smiling expression disappeared from her face and turned into a hurt, pouty look. "Are you sure?" "I'm more than sure." She turned in her car and backed out. I thought she was gone, so I felt relieved. Then I saw my mom walking up to the passenger side of the van and began to open it. I was even more relieved, but still a bit on edge. I asked my mom to hurry up and get going. She seemed annoyed and told me that I can wait while she changes her shoes, and that the river trip will wait. I was old enough to have my permit and drive, so I started the van anxiously, waiting for the okay from my mother to go. Then, to my horror, that same lady pulled back up on my side of the car, windows rolled down. She asked my mother, "Is he your son?" My mother saw my horrified look on my face and replied to the lady, "How is that any of your concern?" My mom replied. The lady's jaw dropped. She then backed out and sped away quickly. I told my mother then everything that had happened and she was astonished. She was angry and wanted to actually fight the lady. I'm glad she's a protective mother. Looking back on the situation makes me thankful it had happened to me and not my younger brother. It scares me to think how many times she may have pulled this scheme, and how many times she might have been successful. That whole don't talk to strangers thing, it's no joke. It could cost you your life. Third shift at a sketch hotel, from Drewbie. For context, my decision-making involving friends is poor at best, and bare-knuckle boxing a grizzly bear at worst. In a mal-conceived set of decisions, I moved from Ohio down to Florida to help a now former friend. After about 2 weeks, we wound up moving to Alabama. An Asian guy and a lesbian in the Bible Belt. Now, once down there, it was impossible to find work that met the minimum income requirements for apartments, which led us to living in our cars for a while. We made it work, parked at a rest stop with a laundromat and showers, but it still is not my favorite memory. Eventually, I wound up begging a hotel to let us stay the night, and I'd pay in the morning with my mother's aid. Well, they wound up cutting me a deal. If I worked 32 hours a week for them, they let me stay in the employee wing. I jumped at the offer without a second thought. The only problem was there wasn't any income, at the start anyway. I eventually did wiggle my way into doubling as a front desk clerk on third shift, so I'd work a night shift, then go work with housekeeping 4 days a week. Now, the guy managing the hotel was a former police chief, but an all-around good guy nonetheless. Don't let him hear you say that, though. The hotel itself, however, left a lot to be desired. Constant flea problems, exposed wires, strong mold population, you get the idea. And now that the stage is set, I'll give you all some stories that could only occur at this questionable hotel in C, Alabama. The first one that comes to mind was a strange call complaint I got early into my third shift training. I was working with a lady. Let's call her Mama L. Mama L was running me through the Windham computer system, teaching me all the weird options in it. We get a call from a room in the back complaining of a guy screaming behind the hotel at 3 in the morning. Not sketchy at all. Sarcasm. Well, we lock up the lobby and head back. There's a guy lying prone in the grass, roughly 20 yards from where we came out of the walkway. He's yelling and screaming, all that good stuff. When he finally glances up and sees us, he starts shouting for us to get on the ground, or the gunman will get us. What? Now that raised some questions. My first assumption, however, was that he was high off of something way worse than Mary Jane, so I started walking towards him. Mama L grabs my shoulder, asking me if I had any common sense to pair with that compassion. I held my position after that, and we radioed the manager. He comes down, an old buddy of his from the police force in tow. Through some strange conversation, the officer tells us he's got it handled. Chief gives both me and Mama L a lecture reminding us to stay safer than that. Mama L was a kid, I've got a roommate who relies on me, etc. Well, the next morning he informs us that the police found a loaded hunting rifle in his room. That made me much more cautious. After that, things were more monotonous. The police would come by looking for people with warrants. There were a lot of domestic disputes that wound up also getting the police involved. Myself and the ladies in housekeeping would often have to force unruly customers off the premises. But the last one I'll mention for now is the thing I saw often on third shift. For context, our hotel lobby is directly attached to the breakfast nook, and it was third shift's duty to have the coffee and oatmeal prepared. We were also required to keep the lights off, as to not disturb the guests at night. So I was using my phone light to brew coffee at about 4 a.m. or so. I was already on edge. We'd always heard rumors of criminals hiding in the woods behind the place, as well as the rumor of a young child who was electrocuted to death directly next to the pool. And while I believe in the supernatural, I'm kind of a hard-to-impress guy about actual sightings. I'm of the strong stance that in order for people to accept the supernatural, there needs to be zero room for doubt. If it's not entirely outside normal explanation, I brush it off. Well, I guess something heard me say that there's nothing weird at this hotel other than people. I had my back turned to everything, filling the coffee pots. I began to hear footsteps. I didn't worry about it at first. I assumed it was the maintenance guy, who I considered a friend. He had all the keys and often stopped by to say hello. I turned around ready to greet him. But it wasn't him. What I do see is a dark mass, even darker than the room. I blink a few times, assuming my glasses had a smear in them or something was in my eye. It stood about half a foot taller than me. I was about 5'6", so I guess that wasn't too much. But then it began to move. It walked right into the light, coming from the hallway, and stopped. Now I was concerned, because it was still a dark mass even though it was illuminated by light. It didn't make any sense. The light should have shown me what it was, but it didn't. It stood there for several seconds, and then vanished. I was stunned, my heart pounding and racing and my brain wandering. I never finished prepping breakfast so fast. I left Alabama a few months later, but I still have vivid memories from my time there. If I have anything to say, it would be to keep your eyes peeled. There's both human danger in this world and other kinds of danger. Closing shift at the gym / the runner, from Bus Driver Jim. In 2005, I was working as a gym attendant in a small hotel in Mullinsburn near Steps, just outside Glasgow. One night, I was closing up at 10 p.m. I was making my way down to the main door to make my way out and lock it up, when I got a strong feeling of being watched. This was an activity I had done many times without incident, and I had never experienced anything out of the ordinary before. I began to feel extremely afraid, and I felt the urge to turn around. When I did, I saw a white shape or mass at the top of the hallway that started to rush towards me. I turned and very quickly closed and locked the main door before running to my dad's car. As soon as I sat down, he said to me, "You look like you've seen a ghost," to which I replied, I think I did." The next day, I went back to work, and that night, when it got dark, I started to try and work out what I'd seen. I looked at the lights and shadows, and I watched for cars coming past the window, checking to see if they would recreate what happened. I watched to see if a car setting off the speed camera just outside would show anything. I switched the lights off and on. I even tried leaving the gym TV on with the lights off, but nothing seemed to recreate what I saw. At this point, I put it down to an overactive imagination, or even fatigue, seeing as I had been working 15 hours a day 6 days in a row at that point. But I still had a strong sense of unease that night when I left. 2 days later, when I was working, someone had an accident in the gym. Nothing serious, just tripped over their own water bottle. I was filling out the accident book, and when the gym was quiet, I decided to look through all the previous entries when I stopped and did a double take. Someone 2 years ago before had suffered a fatal heart attack on the treadmill and died after the ambulance had arrived. It was 2 years to the day of my experience. Did I see the tortured soul of that poor person? Trapped in the gym, unable to leave. I asked the night porter in the hotel about it, and he confirmed that yes, a man had indeed died in that gym. What was creepy, though, was that he had had the heart attack at 21:30, and the paramedics pronounced him dead at 2200, the same time I'd seen something. I left a couple of months later, and the hotel was pulled down a few years after that. I've had other paranormal experiences, even a few cryptid sightings, I believe, but this is one of the times when I can fully admit that I was genuinely terrified. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. More scary stories are on the way soon, so stay tuned. And if you have your own story and want me to narrate it, share it with us at darkstories.org. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate and those that have donated before in the past. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.